Hello, today we'll be looking at an introductory video on the context of the First Crusade and what it was all about. We'll be looking at the power, piety, and politics in 1095, and to help set the scene about what the First Crusade was actually about. To help set the scene about what the First Crusade was all about, we have to look at one of their main goals, which was the capture of Jerusalem. Jerusalem is often referred to as the Holy Land, and although that can refer to the southern Levant, it's typically talking about Jerusalem, which was home to the religious sites of all three Abrahamic faiths, that being Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. For Judaism, it was a second temple. For Christianity, it's a church of the Holy Sepulchre, and for Islam, it's Masjid al-Aqsa. Now, at this point, Jerusalem had gone through a lot of regional instability because it had been passed hands multiple times. We see that it's gone from the Byzantines to the Arabs to the Fatimids, the Seljuks, and then back to the Fatimids. So this regional instability might have been a way for someone to exploit a little later on, which we'll look at that. Additionally, there were some, albeit exaggerated, reports of Christian pilgrims being harassed en route to Jerusalem for pilgrimage by Seljuk Turks. Moving on, we'll be looking at one of the reasons why the First Crusade even happened in the first place. And one of those was the Byzantine Emperor Alexios Komnenos asking the West for help. But why? Well, at that point, there was a crisis. The Seljuk Turks had captured the heartland of Byzantium, which was Anatolia, and Nicaea too, an incredibly important city. As a plea for help, and also possibly out of desperation, Alexios Komnenos sends an envoy to Piacenza, or more so the Council of Piacenza, where Pope Urban II was. The envoy informs the Council of Piacenza about the dire situation that the Byzantine Empire is in. It's important to note that at this point, there was a Byzantine Western Church schism growing, otherwise known as the Great Schism, between Orthodoxy and Catholicism. There was a large ideological split, and therefore this caused division within the Church. The fact that Alexios Komnenos still reached out for help despite this growing schism might show the actual significance of how much they were in trouble. Pope Urban II hears this and takes this to the Council of Clermont in November of 1095. Urban II goes on to give a sermon that's considered a turning point in the build-up to the First Crusade. In this sermon, Urban II offers a remission of sins, or indulgence, in exchange for partaking in the First Crusade. Urban II also describes the Muslims in Jerusalem and the region as violent infidels who continue to harm the Christian population that lives within that region. That is done in order to stir emotions of the local Christians within Europe. Once again, that statement lacked any truth. However, it got many people riled up, and they continued to chant Deus Vult, or God wills it. There is multiple different versions of this sermon. However, in essence, they all say the same thing, that Christianity should unite against the Muslim infidels and take back Jerusalem. It's important to note that Urban II was giving this sermon to a large group of people. And whilst Alexios Komnenos might have been looking for more so mercenaries, Urban II opened this up and marketed it towards a larger group or population, which was the entirety of Christianity. This might have been done in order to extend Urban II's influence, especially as at this point it was shortly after the investiture crisis where there's an anti-pope which undermined Urban II's influence within the region. The First Crusade could be seen as a perfect opportunity for Urban II to regain that influence and perhaps even extend it. On the side, we have a few terms that you might need to get familiar with. Salvation, when your soul goes to heaven; penitence, acts that can cleanse your soul; and penance, confessing sins to priests and making good by completing some form of punishment. But this begs the question, why join a crusade? Well, there's different motivations for crusader participation. For one, the crusade could act as a spiritual or religious pilgrimage, one of penitence, and a promise of salvation, like we mentioned earlier. It also could have been feudal. Within the feudal system in Europe, land, wealth, status, and power mattered a lot, particularly for second sons, which might not have inherited much. It also could have been more of a social aspect, to try and redirect violence from Europe elsewhere. The likelihood is it wasn't just one of these factors, but all of these factors combined which increased crusader participation. Either way, the rank and file of Europe were now involved alongside the knights. Thus, Urban II's recruitment and preaching campaign, or continental tour over Europe, begun. Him and his legates went all over France, but also other parts of Europe to try and garner support and encourage mass enthusiasm. Those who would participate in the crusade would have to take a spiritual pledge, and those who broke that pledge would be considered an outlaw. Additionally, those who touched the lands of crusaders would be excommunicated. As we mentioned earlier, the rank and file, or the common population or people of medieval society within Europe, were now encouraged to join, which gave rise to the People's Crusade led by Peter the Hermit. However, this specific instance led to not much and honestly was quite the failure. To provide you some extra context, let's introduce you to some historical figures or character profiles of which took part in the First Crusade. We have Bishop Adhemar, the papal legate and the spiritual leader of the First Crusade. His role was represented by Pope Urban II and preached unity and discipline within the crusading force. We have Bohemond of Taranto. He was a Norman prince from southern Italy, and he was the son of Robert, and his role was as a military leader. He was known to be quite capable and a strategist. He led the siege of Antioch. Raymond of Toulouse, he was a wealthy southern French noble, devout and elderly, and he was one of the main leaders who brought a large contingency force. Baldwin of Boulogne, he was the brother of Godfrey, and later on became king of Jerusalem. Tancred of Hauteville, he was Bohemond's young nephew and an idealistic knight, and he participated in the capture of Jerusalem, took Bethlehem, and was later regent of Edessa. Lastly, we have Godfrey of Bouillon. He was the Duke of Lower Lorraine, and he was a respected moderate leader and was chosen to rule Jerusalem. As we wrap up this video, let's touch on some perspectives and a helpful video. Fulcher of Chartres was a priest, and he took part in the First Crusade. He has a perspective of the First Crusade being that of religious zeal and motivation, and he has a source that we'll be referring to often. Ibn al-Athir wasn't alive during the Crusades, but he takes a Muslim perspective and talks about Muslim disunity and Christian invaders. Lastly, I'd highly recommend checking out How Pope Urban II Sparked the First Crusade by Kings and Generals. Thank you very much for listening, and hope this video helped.